Ariel Hewani is one of the weakest human beings on planet Earth. I mean, it's almost like you should be arrested for even calling him out.
But if
Just one more question. You said you got in late on Tuesday night. Was it because of
Ariel?
He's
here.
Okay,
He's here. He's here now.
All right.
You got any questions about the fight?
Obviously, it was a big story.
Yeah,
You
he's here.
spoke about it.
He's
it's,
here
it's a
now.
part of the story.
I understand.
and-
Which
and,
part of what story?
Okay, and Dana, just one for you. When you say that you're going to take care of Yoel Romero, what do you mean by that? Can you elaborate? What does that mean?
That's between me and Yoel Romero.
Well, there is.
Thanks for asking. That's between us.
No, I know, but there is the precedent with Carlos Condit and GSP where.
Is there? There's
Is
really
that-
not a precedent. There's different scenarios and different situations.
But is
Don't
that
worry
what
about what Yoel Romero's going to make. Me and Yoel will take care of that.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Who has the next question?
Question for Dana over here.
These guys used to be friends. So how can a friendship or a partnership where these two would help each other out, Dana White would give Ariel Hewani frequent interviews and kind of put him on in a way, and he would credit Ariel Hewani as being the best journalist or the best interviewer at the time. And Ariel Hewani, rightfully so, was the best journalist or the best interviewer. He did his job. How could these two go from close friends who would help each other out to bitter enemies? This is one of the deepest disputes or feuds in MMA, and I think it needs to be talked about. Not a lot of people actually know why these guys have such a deeply rooted hatred for one another. It's not a pretty thing to talk about. It's not something that's glamorous. This is one of the most personal beefs in MMA. And once we get down to it, it's hard to stay objective and not take a side in this dispute between these two. Because once I show you guys why this is actually an issue or why this beef exists in the first place, it just seems like Dana White is being a bully. But let's get into it. So Dana White slapped his wife. We all know this. We all saw the headlines. We all watched the videos. If you're watching this video right now, you know Dana White slapped his wife. I made a video about it. It's on my channel. If you guys remember what I said in the video, I said that Ariel Hewani is going to have a field day because these guys have such a deeply rooted beef, deeply rooted hatred for one another that it only seems right that Ariel Hewani would speak up about this or say something about this. Ariel Hewani responds, and it kind of gives us more insight as to just how serious this beef was, because Ariel Hewani's response enlightened a lot of casual fans or people who did not know how much these two hated one another. It kind of re-sparked that, and it made a lot of people wonder why. Why does Dana White hate this guy so much? Why did these guys have such a bitter rivalry, right? Dana White has publicly trashed Ariel Hewani so many times, and Ariel Hewani goes on this podcast and he speaks about Dana White slapping his wife. And as you can see on his podcast, it was surreal for him talking about it because all of the things Dana White said about Ariel Hewani, he mentions one thing that stuck with him, right? And he talks about how Dana White was making fun of Ariel Hewani because he was crying about a situation where he got fired from ESPN because of Dana White. But we're going to get into that in a little bit. And he was crying about it, and Dana White was laughing at him. And, what will your kids think? So then Ariel Hewani makes a good point. What will your kids think, right? Like, what will your kids think now that they see you lay your hands on their mother?
of all the things that he has said, there has only been one that has stuck with me, that hurt me right here. Dana was on UFC Filtered. He was making fun of the fact that when I spoke about it on this show in a different studio, I got very emotional. They were talking about me crying, and he said something to the effect of that I looked like a wuss. Your kids are going to see that, and how embarrassed they would be by seeing their father cry. I'll raise the same freaking question that he raised about me back in 2016. What are your kids going to say about you? What are your kids going to say about your legacy, about the way you treat fighters, about the way you treat people, about your business practices? What are your kids going to say about that video? What are your kids going to say about the kind of person that you are? What are your kids going to say about you? Ask yourself that question. What are your kids going to say about you? Awards coming up. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back in a second.
And once I heard that, I realized just how personal this beef was. I was going to cover it in a video where I write some super long script and make a bunch of jokes, but I feel like I should just give you guys the information and just give my raw thoughts on it. But I'm going to try to stay as objective as possible. I've already failed at that. So there was a time where Ariel Hewani actually worked for ESPN. He worked for Dana White. He worked with him. He was a journalist. He had press credentials. So he was able to get inside scoops. He was able to ask questions at the, when the fighters would do press conferences. He was able to do all of that. Well, eventually Ariel Hewani actually broke news that Brock Lesnar would be returning to the UFC. Now, this didn't sit well with the UFC because they were going to make a promotional package and make it some big deal and a big reveal. But Ariel Hewani broke the news first. As well as Ariel Hewani also broke the news of Nate Diaz, Conor McGregor 2 before it was announced by the UFC. Now, could this be a little snaky if Ariel Helwani had some super deep inside scoop from the UFC that he only has because of press credentials? And if the UFC asked him not to do that, maybe this could be some super bad thing. But at the end of the day, Ariel Helwani was a journalist. And as a journalist, it's a privilege, or it's almost like a right. Like, you should expect them to break news once they get it. Just as TMZ, as soon as they found out that Dana White slapped his wife and obtained the footage, they showed it to everyone. Dana White wasn't sending shots at TMZ because he was the one in the wrong. He was in trouble. It seems that Ariel Helwani released news before the UFC initially broke it, and Dana White seemingly got mad at Ariel Helwani for doing his job. So Dana called in Ariel Helwani. He was with a few of his people, and he just said, you're out, you're fired. You're not working here anymore. And then he would go on to bash Ariel Helwani, this, that, and the third, and ruining their great business relationship that they had. You can hear Ariel Helwani talk about it here.
First, I reported that Nate Diaz and Conor McGregor were close to finalizing their fight at UFC 202. That ended up being right. Then around 30 minutes later, I broke the news that Brock Lesnar was close to finalizing a deal to fight at UFC 200. This was massive news because everyone thought Brock had retired from MMA and that he was under contract with WWE. A lot of people thought that I was wrong. I started to be told via text that the UFC was very upset that this news was being reported. And around 3 hours later, they actually officially confirmed both pieces of information. So I ended up being right on both fronts. For the record, I'm still batting 1,000 with my breaking news. I'm very proud of that.
Good for you.
Right before the main event on Saturday night, I was asked by a PR person to go to the back because Dana White wanted to speak to me. And my relationship with him these days hasn't been great, so I didn't think that anything good would come of that. And I said that I wanted to stay in the media room to watch the main event. Another PR person came very sort of anxiously, if you will, and asked me to go back, and I said that the only way I would go back is if I brought a colleague with me, my videographer. And we went to the back. Dana was standing there. He was visibly upset, and he said, "Get out of here. You're done. Your credentials are gone. You're not welcome here ever again."
And this is really it. Dana White would send a lot of shots about Ariel Helwani, talk a lot of garbage about him, and make fun of him a lot, call him like a scum. He went on Patty Pimlet's podcast, and they made fun of him. Ariel Helwani, for a lot of the majority of times, yeah, he does stir the pot in terms of fighter pay and a bunch of different stuff, and he advocates a lot for the fighters, but it just didn't seem like what Ariel Helwani did should equate to how Dana White would treat him. He took his job, he told him that he was done, his career is over. It seemed like everything was stacked against Ariel Helwani, and now he's the biggest journalist in the MMA industry. Ever since that time when Dana White fired Ariel Helwani, he has never worked for Dana White again. He's worked with ESPN afterwards, I believe, or Fox. He worked with the promotion that would back the UFC in terms of broadcasting, but he never worked for Dana White. He never worked under Dana White or closely with him. And it was so bad to the point that Dana White would have security guards actually escort Ariel Helwani out of the premises like 30 minutes before White would arrive. In Dana White's words, "I don't want to see him. I don't want him in my sight." Now, this is the biggest power trip bully tactic I've ever. He said, listen to Ariel Helwani talk about it.
Did Dana White run you out of ESPN?
When I would be at events, Dan and everyone, and let's say it's the weigh-ins, right? And there's a desk there and I'm doing something beforehand, but Dana White is coming as a guest in 30 minutes or something. I would have to be escorted out of the venue because per his request, I couldn't be in his vicinity or his line of sight. So here I am on the set of a company that I work for, and security, the nicest people in the world who were embarrassed that they had to do this, would tell me, "I'm sorry, Ariel, we have to walk you out." You know how that makes someone feel?
So all of this, seemingly because of Ariel Helwani doing his job. That's all we know. May there have been some in-depth personal thing that Ariel Helwani did to get that information, or maybe they had a clause where he shouldn't do it, or he agreed to Dana White not to do it. But Dana White never said that. It just seemed like Ariel Helwani did his job, and now Dana White hates the guy. But they were good friends. It's hard not to think Dana White's the bad guy here. There's two sides to every story, and while Ariel Helwani can be annoying, or he does kind of stir the pot with fighter pay and a bunch of different things, I don't think it's to the extent that Dana White can talk about him like he does, because at the end of the day, he's a human being. Ariel Helwani's words towards Dana White after he got caught slapping his wife on camera, they were harsh, but I think they were fair. Now, do I think Dana White should be fired? That's not my place to state anything on that. You guys let me know what you guys think, if Dana White should get fired for what he did. But I think this hatred for Ariel Helwani just doesn't make any sense. It's hypocritical. It's dumb because, like I said, Dana White wasn't sending shots at TMZ and saying he hates TMZ because they caught him slapping his wife. So why is he hating on Ariel because Ariel Helwani got the inside scoop and did his job? Ariel Hewani is not innocent. He said some stuff about Dana White too. But who started this? Who originated the beef? Who started all of this stuff that's happened? It was Dana White. Yes, Ariel Hewani is the one who broke the news, and we don't know if there was some intricate clause or something or agreement between those two that wasn't on paper. But simply put, he fired the guy because he broke news. He did his job as a journalist. And if you want to fire him, that's fine. But don't fire the man and then call him the scum of the earth, call him all these names, just disrespect him, ask him, what would your kids think? Like, that was so unnecessary. Do I think these guys will ever be friends again? No. Do I think these guys will ever have a good business relationship again? No. Will we ever get an interview between Dana White and Ariel Hewani? Probably not. But I'd be lying if I told you guys this beef wasn't anything more than Ariel Hewani doing his job and Dana White literally spazzing because of it. Ariel Hewani, like I said, is not innocent. He stirs the pot. He takes any opportunity he can to poop on the management at UFC, and he talks about fighter pay a lot. He does depict Dana White as some big bad bully and the UFC management as such. Maybe that's just how he sees Dana White, because from that story of Ariel Hewani being escorted out of the building by security guards because Dana White's 30 minutes away, I can't blame Ariel. It's his podcast, it's his platform. He can talk about Dana how he wants to if that's the true image that he sees of Dana White. But when we look back at the originator of all of this, it was Dana White. Ariel did his job, and it just seems like Dana White wasn't having it. There's nothing more to this story. That's all it was. Yeah, I can show you guys a bunch of clips of them talking bad about one another, or Ariel Hewani stirring the pot, or Dana White just trashing the guy completely. If you want to do that, go watch Patty Pimlet's podcast. There's a whole lot of Dana White just talking bad about Ariel Hewani on Patty Pimlet's podcast. But for those of you who didn't understand why Dana White has this weird hatred for Ariel Hewani, that's why. He did his job. There's nothing more to it. It's just weird. It's hypocritical. And now that it came out that Dana White slapped his wife, it's like, you talked all that garbage about this guy, but like you slapped your wife. Like, you can't. He would talk about Ariel like he's some horrible, disgusting human being and asked him what his kids would think about it. And then it comes out like this. And Ariel Hewani has every right to go crazy on Dana White, which I don't even think that Ariel Hewani went as hard on Dana White as he could have. It seemed like he was being fair. And he just asked him the question, what do your kids think when they see that video? You know, this beef has been going on for years. I think it's about time it just comes to an end. Maybe Dana can just, stop trashing Ariel Hewani every second that he's brought up. And maybe Ariel Hewani can stop talking about fighter pay every second he gets, unless he truly thinks that fighters need to get paid more, which he probably does. But don't trash the UFC and make them seem like some big bad organization every second you get, because they do take care of their fighters in different ways. And yes, there are some instances of fighters getting underpaid and things like that, but you can't make them act like they're all bad. They're a business at the end of the day, and I feel like fighters for the most part get paid what they're worth. But that's not what this video is about. Because yes, anyone in the comments, you could name a fighter that's grossly underpaid, like Paulo Costa. Yes, I understand. The point is, this weird hatred for Dana White stems from Ariel doing his job, and it's just weird. It makes Dana White look weird. We can only imagine how Dana White is when the cameras aren't there. I said I wasn't going to be biased, and it's just hard not to. It's really hard to stay objective when you hear that this guy's literally kicking Ariel Hewani out of a building, doing his job for a company that he works for. He's getting him removed because Dana White doesn't want him in his line of sight. I wish this beef would end. It's probably not going to end, but for those of you who didn't know why these guys literally hate each other, or why Dana White has this weird hatred for the guy, that's why. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Hit the subscribe button if you're new. It's your boy T-Dog, and I'll see you in the next one.